I'm Mallory Jameson, 29 years old, and I used to believe that no matter how distant things felt, my parents would still show up for the biggest day of my life. I held on to that hope, even as I stitched every detail of my wedding by hand, imagining their faces in the crowd. But when the doors opened and the music started, I saw only empty chairs where my family should have been hours later. They posted a video from Hawaii, clinking glasses with my younger sister under palm trees, like my wedding had never happened, and I can still remember the caption. It read, "Celebrating our brightest star. Not a single word about me or the day they missed. Instead of congratulations, they left silence and a glowing beach photo." Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had to make peace with being invisible in your own family, I was raised just outside Akron, Ohio, in a modest house where everything looked picture perfect from the street. My dad, David, was a retired insurance broker, and my mom, Elaine, kept things pristine from the polished windows to the manicured lawn. They took pride in appearances and holiday newsletters full of smiling family photos. We were the kind of family that signed cards with all our names. But over time, I learned that not all names carried the same weight in our house. Mine was always a little lighter. My younger sister, Vanessa, was the golden one. Even as kids, her spelling bee ribbons earned fridge space, while my art awards gathered dust on my bedroom shelf. I loved sketching cityscapes and imagining layouts for magazine covers. But those things didn't earn much more than a nod from Dad. He'd flip through my sketchbook like it was a takeout menu, then go on bragging about Vanessa's latest debate win. By the time she was 15, my parents had already started calling her their future lawyer with pride that poured out of every conversation I tried for years to keep up, not to compete, but to feel seen. Once in middle school, I stayed up for days crafting a visual campaign for a school project that ended up winning first prize in the district. My teacher said it showed real talent, but when I brought the certificate home, my mom smiled and handed me a grocery list, said we needed eggs for dinner. Vanessa, meanwhile, got a weekend trip for her internship acceptance at a downtown law office. That was how it always went when she came home. The whole house shifted around her. Their voices got warmer, the dinners fancier, and the conversation never strayed far from her rising career. By the time I left for college, I'd already decided I wouldn't wait on their praise anymore. I'd been accepted into the design program at a state university nearby with a small scholarship and a big determination to build something of my own. I packed up my markers, my old laptop, and a folder of sketches, and moved into a campus apartment with borrowed furniture and too little heat. That's where I met Adam. He was a grad student, then working as a teaching assistant for one of my design classes. Thoughtful kind with this calm way of talking that made me feel like what I said mattered. We bonded over fonts and layouts and late-night coffee. Eventually those talks turned into walks, and those walks turned into plans for a life together. Nina came into my life around the same time, a bold photography major with a camera, always slung around her neck, and zero patience for people who didn't see my worth. We became our own little trio, holding each other up when things felt thin. The more I worked, the more I grew. Professors started noticing, clients started calling, and little by little I was building a name for myself. I'd send updates to my parents, links to my work snapshots of brand campaigns, but the replies were always short distracted. Sometimes they didn't reply at all. Vanessa's updates, though, were shared in group texts with exclamation points and photos of courthouse buildings she'd interned at when I told them I'd been hired full-time at a design agency after graduation. My dad said, "Sounds busy. Hope you're taking time to catch up with your sister. She's moving fast." I poured that hurt into my work, into late nights, building identities for small businesses and ad campaigns that got real attention. I was making a life I was proud of, even if no one at home said the words years later. When Adam proposed on the river trail near downtown, I said yes. Without hesitation, we picked a quiet venue by the water, a restaurant we both loved, and I spent months designing every piece of our wedding, from the invites to the menus to the floral signage. And when it was time, I sent my parents an envelope with a handwritten note inside, asking them to be there. I called too, left messages, gently hopeful. My dad eventually replied by text, "We'll see what we can do," and I held on to those 7 words like they meant something. Vanessa never answered 5 days before the ceremony. My mom called her voice sharp with distraction. She told me they wouldn't be coming, said Vanessa's engagement had taken them to Maui and they couldn't miss it. Her words were clean, like a business memo. "We wish you well, Mallory, but this just isn't a priority for us right now." I sat on the floor of our apartment, phone still pressed to my ear. Adam beside me, silent until I started to cry on the day of the wedding. I walked down the aisle in the dress I'd sketched and altered myself, flanked by friends and surrounded by warmth from people who'd shown up. Nina snapped photos. Adam's parents hugged me like I'd been theirs forever. But when I looked out at the rows of chairs, 2 in the front sat empty, and no matter how much joy filled that room, a piece of me stayed hollow, and I didn't know it yet. But the worst was still to come. We'd only been back from the honeymoon a few days when my phone lit up with a call from my dad. It was late morning. I was sitting at our dining table sorting through a small stack of thank you cards. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was an apology, or at the very least a belated acknowledgement. But the moment I answered, I could hear it in his voice. He wasn't calling to make anything right. "Mallory," he said, brisk and to the point. "We need to talk about the college loan." I blinked, confused, thinking I must have misheard. He repeated himself this time, adding that they had covered a $20,000 loan during my undergrad years, and now, given the upcoming expenses for Vanessa's wedding, it was only fair I start repaying what I owed. I sat still for a moment, the quiet hum of our refrigerator suddenly loud in the silence. Then I asked, "What loan?" His answer was short. He claimed it had been taken out in my name, that they'd made the payments while I was in school. He said it was time I contributed to something bigger, that Vanessa's wedding was a family milestone, the kind that apparently mattered. I told him I'd look into it and hung up. My hands were cold. Adam looked over from the kitchen, saw my face, and walked over without saying a word. I explained what had just happened, and he didn't hesitate. "We're pulling the records tonight," he said. That evening I pulled out the bin from our closet, where I'd kept every file from my school years. Receipts, loan statements, payment confirmations. I'd saved it all. Each page told the same story. I'd paid those loans myself every month, every year. Part-time freelance jobs, extra hours at the agency, long nights that bled into early mornings. I'd worked through school to avoid needing their help, and I'd done it. I brought the folder to the living room and laid everything out on the floor. Adam cross-checked the numbers while I called my bank to verify what I already knew. The rep on the phone confirmed that the loans had been repaid years ago. No balances remained. There had never been a payment from David or Elaine Jameson. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a lie. The next morning I called him back. My voice stayed calm, but my jaw was tight. I checked, I said. "Every record, every statement. I paid for my education on my own." He paused just for a second, then said I must be confused. He pivoted to Vanessa, saying her wedding would be a major event, something important for our family's future. I could hear my mother's voice in the background, low but firm, echoing agreement. That's when the edges of something inside me hardened. They had skipped my wedding, dismissed it with words I couldn't forget. And now they wanted money for hers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself again. Instead, I said, "Don't contact me about trivial matters, and let the silence hang between us." The same words my mother had used when she told me they wouldn't come to my wedding. He started to speak again, but I didn't wait. I ended the call and turned off my phone. That night, I told Adam everything, and he wrapped his arms around me, steady and quiet. I called Nina after, and she listened through the entire story before saying, "You don't owe them a thing, Mal, not one thing." Her certainty steadied me. Later that week, Adam's parents came over for dinner. When I explained what had happened, Marcia reached across the table and took my hand. "You don't need their approval," she said. "You're part of our family now." Her kindness didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something I'd gone without for a long time: safety. The next few days were heavy, not because I questioned what I'd done, but because the reality of it all finally settled in. The loan story wasn't about money. It was about power, about rewriting history in a way that left me indebted, small easy to push aside. They had no intention of apologizing. They hadn't even considered what they'd done wrong. Their silence after the wedding, their absence, the video from Hawaii, that had all been intentional. I thought about reaching out to Vanessa, but there hadn't been a single word from her. Not a text, not a call. She'd stood by while they ignored me and never even looked back. And now, whether she asked for it or not, they were trying to pull me back into her orbit, as if my purpose had always been to orbit her. Later that week, Adam and I sat in the living room, flipping through our wedding album. Nina had captured everything: the light coming through the trees, the cake cutting my hand resting on Adam's as we laughed through our first dance. There were moments I didn't even remember happening, like Rachel adjusting my veil in the mirror or Greg wiping a tear during the vows. These were the people who showed up. These were the ones who stayed. I closed the album and placed it on the coffee table. My parents hadn't just missed a day. They'd made it clear that no matter what I built, no matter how hard I worked, I would always be second to Vanessa. And now they'd tried to drag me back under that same old weight. But I wasn't that girl anymore, and though I hadn't planned to take it further, I knew then I needed to make things clear in a way they couldn't ignore. I picked up the phone and dialed a number Nina had given me a few months earlier. It rang twice. Then a calm voice answered Dr. Lorraine Myers, a therapist Nina had started seeing during a rough stretch of her own. I asked if she had any openings. She did. And just like that, something in my life quietly, steadily began to shift. The office was small and smelled faintly of cinnamon tea. A soft chair sat angled near a window, and Dr. Lorraine Myers offered me that seat before settling across from me with a yellow legal pad balanced on her knee. I wasn't sure where to start, so I told her what had happened, how my parents had skipped my wedding, how the call for money came just days later, how I'd found out the loan story was a lie. She nodded as I spoke, her pen moving in slow, quiet strokes. When I paused, unsure if I was rambling, she simply said, "You've been holding a lot by yourself. We met once a week in that same room." At first, I mostly recited facts, what they'd said, what I'd done, how I'd blocked their numbers. But gradually, things shifted. I found myself describing the weight that never left, even on good days, the way my stomach tightened when I heard Vanessa's name, the sting that came every time my mother's number flashed on my screen, even now, even knowing I wouldn't pick up. Outside those sessions, life moved forward. I returned to my studio space at the agency and kept pace with a growing list of clients, but something was different. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I couldn't sleep. Some mornings I'd sit in the living room with a mug of coffee that went cold before I drank it, watching the sky shift over the rooftops like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Adam noticed. He didn't push, just ask me each night how the session went. Some evenings I had nothing to say. Other times I'd talk about moments I hadn't thought of in years, like the night I overheard my mother on the phone telling someone that Vanessa was the real future of the family, and how I'd gone upstairs and thrown out 3 sketchbooks without even looking through them. Nina came by often. She brought over fresh bread from the market or sent me photos of her latest gallery work. "You need to get out of that house," she'd say, tossing me a jacket before I could argue. She dragged me to art shows and student showcases at the community college, trying to pull me back into the parts of myself I used to protect so fiercely. It helped in small ways, but the ache lingered. Around that time, Rachel reached out. She asked if she could stop by, said she had something on her mind. When she came over, she brought a bottle of iced tea and a folder tucked under her arm. We sat at the kitchen table while she opened it to show me printouts of texts and photos from the family group chat ones I hadn't seen in months. I'd forgotten she was still in it. They've been trying to paint a different version of things she said. She showed me a message from my mom describing my wedding as a private elopement and calling the Hawaii trip a long-standing plan. I sat back in my chair, the words blurring for a moment before they came into focus. My dad had added a comment beneath one photo saying, "We tried our best, but Mallory always wanted distance." Vanessa had liked the message. Rachel didn't say anything at first. She let me read every word. When I finished, she said, "I just thought you should know. They're rewriting it all." Then she added, "And I'm not going to let them." I didn't cry. I didn't speak for a long while. I just stared at the photo they'd posted. Vanessa and Jeffrey holding hands on a cliffside trail in Maui, smiling at the camera with a caption about gratitude and growth. No mention of where their oldest daughter had been that week. That night after Rachel left, I sat with Adam in the living room while the dishwasher hummed in the kitchen. I told him everything Rachel had shared, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. Then he reached over, rested his hand on mine, and said, "This isn't about what they say anymore. It's about what you decide to carry." Dr. Myers brought that line up in our next session. I told her I didn't know how to stop carrying it. She said that was the point of grief, not just for people we lose, but for relationships that never became what we needed them to be. "You're not letting go of a person," she said. "You're letting go of the story you've waited your whole life to hear." I wrote that down in my notebook later that night, just that one line. The following week, I went back into my old hard drives and pulled up files I hadn't opened in years. Personal pieces, posters I'd designed in college, logo concepts from my early freelancing days, illustrations I'd drawn before I was ever paid for my work. I looked through them slowly, file by file. Some of them were rough, unpolished. Others felt strangely tender. I saved the ones I liked into a folder called Still Mine. By spring, I started feeling space in my chest that hadn't been there before. I was still in therapy, I was still adjusting, but I was breathing more easily. Adam and I started taking weekend trips again, just small drives to nearby towns, new diners, quiet bookstores. Nina gave me a camera to borrow just for fun, she said, and I started taking pictures of signs, shadows, things that looked like they had stories no one had asked about yet. There was one afternoon, a Sunday, when I was standing in line at a coffee shop near campus and overheard a girl behind me say her dad was flying in for her senior showcase. For a second, something sharp moved through my chest. Then it passed. I ordered my drink, stepped out into the cold, and thought my dad isn't coming. But that doesn't mean I'm not still standing. The hardest part wasn't letting go. It was accepting that the apology would never come. That the words I'd rehearsed in my head about how much it hurt, about how I still hoped it wasn't worth saying anymore. I was finally ready to make that truth permanent. The email was already half written. I'd drafted it months ago after one of my first sessions with Dr. Myers, but never hit send. That week I opened it again, rewrote the beginning, and added one more line at the end, something clear and final. Then I walked over to the kitchen where Adam was making dinner and said, "I think I'm ready." We sat at the kitchen table after dinner, 2 plates still stacked beside us, and I opened my laptop. The email I drafted months ago blinked back at me from the screen still unsent. Adam slid his chair closer, placed a hand on my back and said, "You don't have to do anything tonight, but if you're ready, we'll hit send together." I read it one more time, then closed my eyes and began to rewrite. The message was addressed to all 3 of them, my parents and Vanessa. I kept it simple. I wrote that I was no longer willing to stay in a relationship where I was ignored, rewritten, or used. That their actions skipping my wedding, asking for money under false pretenses, spinning stories behind my back, had shown me exactly where I stood. I told them I was done pretending that this was a family that treated everyone equally. At the end, I added the sentence, Dr. Myers suggested, "Any future attempts to contact me will not be acknowledged." Adam read it once without speaking. Then he gave a small nod and said, "It's clear, it's strong, and it's honest." I hovered over the send button for a few seconds. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then I clicked. There wasn't any dramatic sense of relief right away. I didn't exhale or cry. I just closed the lid of my laptop and sat back in my chair, noticing that my hands weren't shaking. That was enough. I blocked their numbers that same night. Adam helped me disconnect their emails and clear out my voicemail. I removed them from social media, changed my settings, and added new filters. It wasn't about hiding. It was about not leaving any open doors for them to walk through. The next morning, I went to see Dr. Myers. I told her what I'd done step by step. She smiled gently, then said, "That was an act of self-trust. You've given yourself space to breathe." For the first time, I believed her. Nina came over later that week with takeout and a stack of design magazines. She didn't ask how I was. She just made a spot on the couch and passed me a pair of scissors. We spent hours flipping through pages, cutting out textures and colors for a mood board. I'd started back in college but never finished. Around midnight, she looked over and said, "You look lighter." I hadn't noticed until then, but I wasn't tired the way I used to be. Not bone-tired, just quiet. The silence from my family stretched into weeks. No calls, no messages, no apology, no attempt to undo anything. Dr. Myers said that wasn't unusual. She said that when people lose access to something they always expected, they often freeze, or retreat, or look for someone else to spin the story for them. I didn't mind the quiet. I filled it with work, with slow walks along the river, with dinners at Greg and Marcia's house, where Marcia always sent us home with leftovers we didn't ask for. Adam and I took a long weekend up north, stayed in a little rental with tall windows and creaky floors. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We just let the quiet settle around us and leaned into it. In early spring, I picked up a new contract with a mid-sized firm in town, brand identity for a regional food company that wanted something fresh. The meetings were intense but respectful. They asked questions, gave feedback, and treated me like I knew what I was doing. I'd leave those meetings and sit in my car for a few minutes just watching the sunlight hit the windshield, grateful that I didn't have to explain who I was to anyone in that room. Rachel stopped by with a housewarming plant one afternoon. She said she hadn't spoken to David or Elaine since the email went out. She told me Vanessa had posted a few vague things, online quotes about letting people misunderstand you and staying unbothered, but nothing direct. I didn't ask for more. That night, Adam made soup, and we ate on the porch with sweaters pulled around our shoulders. He asked if I missed them. I thought about it. Then I said, "I think I miss what I used to hope they could be." He nodded once and didn't press further. Dr. Myers had told me that grief comes in waves, even when the thing you lost was never safe to begin with. Some days were steady, some days were sharp. But the truth was, I'd stopped waiting for the version of them that would never arrive. At the agency, a new intern asked if I had any siblings. I paused for a second, then just said, "Not really." She didn't ask again. It was small moments like that, unremarkable everyday moments, that showed me the shift was real, that I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't performing calm or detachment. I was simply living in the space I had made for myself. I started sleeping through the night again. I opened old sketchbooks and began reworking designs I'd shelved years ago. I made time for things I used to rush through, baking, reading, taking long showers, without thinking about what I needed to prove next. And I began to look ahead in ways I hadn't let myself before. Adam and I started talking about the future, not in vague someday terms, but in real ones. A house, a garden, maybe kids. He brought home a pamphlet from a local community center that offered free parenting workshops and placed it on the kitchen counter. Neither of us said anything, but the next day I signed us up. The future didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt open, and I hadn't even realized how much I'd been waiting for that feeling. Spring moved slowly into summer, and with it came a kind of calm I hadn't known before. I filled my days with work and walks and late dinners on the porch, with Adam, the two of us, watching the sky turn pink above the rooftops. Most of my world felt still, but Rachel's calls started coming more often. She'd stop by after work or send a message now and then with updates from the family side. Apparently, my absence hadn't gone unnoticed. She told me that after the email, my parents had tried explaining things to a few relatives, saying I'd chosen distance and had always been sensitive. But the story didn't land the way they'd hoped. It started with my Aunt Marilyn, who had been close to my mom for years. Rachel said she was the first to say something aloud, that what my parents had done skipping the wedding asking for money afterward didn't sit right. Then others followed. A couple of cousins unfollowed Vanessa on social media. One uncle declined to attend a family dinner for the first time in over a decade. It was quiet, no drama, just a gradual pulling away. They thought people wouldn't notice, Rachel said one afternoon while helping me move patio furniture. But they did, and no one's pretending anymore. I didn't gloat. There wasn't any satisfaction in it. I just felt a strange quiet in my chest, like someone had taken the constant hum of injustice and turned the volume down. But things didn't stop with my parents. Rachel told me Vanessa was dealing with pressure on her end, too. Her fiancé, Mason Calloway, came from a family that was a little more traditional. His parents had asked about the wedding, why my side of the family hadn't mentioned it, why Vanessa's engagement trip had overlapped with it. Apparently, they'd seen the Hawaii posts and found them odd. At a dinner with Mason's parents, the topic came up. His mother, a soft-spoken woman named Colleen, asked about the timeline. Vanessa tried to explain, but the answers were vague. Mason admitted later to Rachel that it left a strange feeling in the room. It made us look cold, he'd told her, like we'd just erased Mallory. Rachel didn't press for details, but I could sense the shape of what was happening. Vanessa, who'd always been the favored one, now found herself answering questions no one had ever asked her before. The version of events my parents had tried to float was beginning to fray. Around that time, Nina and I were putting together a joint submission for a local arts grant. We'd rented a shared space downtown and were working late one evening when she looked over and said, "They're unraveling, you know." I paused, not sure what she meant. "Your parents, Vanessa. All of it. You pulled the thread." I didn't say anything back. I just kept working. But her words stayed with me. Later that week, Marcia called to ask if I wanted to help her plan a small summer gathering, just a few neighbors' friends from the church she'd once sung in, and some of Adam's childhood friends. I said yes, without thinking too hard about it. The following Saturday, we had lawn chairs out on their front porch and lemonade sweating in tall glasses. People I didn't know came up to tell me they'd heard about my design work or that they remembered Adam's high school art fair and how we must have met there. We hadn't, but I smiled and let them tell the story anyway. At one point, Greg pulled me aside and said, "You know, you're the calmest I've ever seen you. That's worth everything." I just nodded. He wasn't wrong. A week later, Rachel sent a message asking if we could meet. We grabbed coffee at a quiet cafe near the library, and she slid into the booth across from me with that look she got when she had something to say, but wasn't sure how to start. "It's about Vanessa," she said. I waited. She reached out to Mason's sister, told her the family's been complicated lately, that she didn't mean to hurt you and that she's trying to keep things from falling apart. I looked down at my coffee. Rachel continued. She didn't apologize, not directly. But it sounds like she's starting to feel it. I nodded once slowly. I didn't need a statement or a speech, just the truth being spoken aloud for once. That night, Adam and I sat on the back steps as the sun went down, feet bare against the wood. He handed me a bowl of blueberries he'd picked from the garden Marcia helped us start. We sat in silence for a long while, then he said, "You still thinking about them?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Sometimes. But it doesn't take up as much room as it used to." He squeezed my hand. Rachel visited again a few days later with a folded note in her purse. "I wasn't going to give this to you," she said, "but I think you should see it." It was a card. No return address. Vanessa's handwriting. Inside was a short paragraph, carefully written, not overly emotional. She said she didn't know how to fix what had happened, but that she hoped I was doing well, that she understood why I pulled away. There wasn't much more than that. No asking to meet, no excuses. I placed the card on the side table in our entryway and left it there. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel much of anything. Things were already moving forward. The next week, I opened my inbox to find a message from a design conference in Michigan, one I'd applied to years earlier and forgotten about. They'd come across my updated portfolio and wanted me to speak. A small keynote, just 15 minutes. I said yes. And in the middle of that preparation, sketching ideas, planning visuals, I noticed a new kind of excitement settling into my body. One that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. I was building something that stood on its own. The first sign came on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after I accepted the conference keynote. Adam and I were on the porch, coffee in hand, when Rachel pulled up out front. She didn't call or text ahead, just climbed the steps and said, "You might want to sit down for this." She pulled her phone from her bag, scrolled a bit, and handed it over. It was a photo taken at a baby shower Vanessa had attended the day before. She looked tired, hair tied back, smile not quite reaching her eyes. A few people had commented underneath, but it was one in particular that made my chest tighten. Colleen Calloway had replied with 3 simple words, "Hope she's okay." Rachel sat beside me, letting the silence stretch. "That's the 4th event this month she's been at without Mason," she said quietly. "He's still with her technically, but people are starting to notice." I passed the phone back. Adam didn't say anything, just reached for my hand. A few days later, the pattern continued. Rachel told me one of Mason's colleagues had backed out of their wedding planning committee, a close friend who had been helping with venue logistics. No big announcement, just a polite message saying she couldn't commit anymore. Mason's sister unfollowed Vanessa on Instagram the same week. The distance was beginning to show. Meanwhile, work at the agency had picked up. I was finishing a series of branding packages for a nonprofit in Cincinnati, something that had started small but grown quickly. The final presentation was scheduled for the first Friday in August, and I had a notebook full of revisions, feedback, and color proofs. It kept me busy. It kept my mind where I needed it to be. But Rachel kept dropping things by small pieces, little updates. Not gossip, not drama, just quiet evidence of how the narrative my parents had clung to was coming apart at the seams. Vanessa had apparently tried to make peace with Aunt Marilyn, the same aunt who'd questioned the whole Hawaii trip. She showed up with flowers and a handwritten card, but Marilyn didn't budge. "It's not about the trip," she told her. "It's about what you stood by and let happen." One night I sat with Dr. Myers and told her all of it. Every update, every shift. She nodded slowly and said, "It's interesting how people respond when they can't control the story anymore. Sometimes they shrink, sometimes they scramble." I asked her if it mattered what happened now, if the damage was done and couldn't be undone. She paused, then said, "You can't uncut the thread, Mallory, but you can stop it from tying itself back around you." That stuck with me. Rachel called again the next morning, this time from her car. She was outside a small bookstore downtown where she'd run into someone from Vanessa's firm. "Word's getting around," she said. "Apparently, a few people are questioning how she's handled things outside of work. Her mentor pulled her from a client pitch last week. Said she seemed distracted. I didn't know what to say. I didn't feel angry or vindicated, just still, like I was watching something that had once ruled over me slowly fall apart without needing me to do a thing." That weekend, Greg and Marcia invited us to dinner again. Greg grilled vegetables on the patio, while Marcia brought out slices of blueberry pie. She poured coffee into mismatched mugs and said, "Feels like you're turning a corner." I looked at Adam, who nodded just slightly, and I realized she was right. The following Monday, I received a small, unmarked envelope in our mailbox. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. I took it inside and opened it at the kitchen table. It was a single page typed, "From my mother." She didn't apologize. Not really. The letter was cautious, even formal. She wrote that she wished things had gone differently, that she hoped I was doing well, that she missed how things used to be. At the bottom, she added a final line, "We never meant to hurt you. We only wanted what was best." I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer where I kept our utility bills, and didn't reply. That same evening, Adam walked in with groceries under one arm and an ultrasound photo in his hand. I blinked, then looked at his face. He smiled. I looked again, then back at him. "You're serious?" I asked. He nodded. We hadn't been trying, not officially, but we hadn't been not trying either. The days had blurred into something softer lately. We talked about the future so often that it had started showing up on its own. I stared at the small black and white image, and the next breath I took felt different. It settled in my chest, like something new had started, not a replacement for the past, but a foundation for something that had never been built before. We told Greg and Marcia first, then Nina, who screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Rachel came by with a tiny onesie from a local shop folded neatly in a paper bag with a note that just said, "You'll be incredible." I didn't tell my parents. I didn't send a card. I didn't post anything online. This part of my life wasn't for them. Dr. Myers called it a clean boundary with joy on the other side. She said most people never get that far, but I had. And soon, I'd learn just how far that line could stretch. The day I got the call, I was standing in the nursery. I'd been smoothing out the corners of a quilt Marcia had sewn pale yellow and soft green with tiny stitched birds in the border. I'd just placed it over the crib when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Rachel. Her voice was low but steady. "I thought you'd want to know," she said. Vanessa and Mason called off the engagement. I didn't answer right away. She waited a beat, then added, "It wasn't mutual. He ended it." She told me what she knew, that Mason had pulled back gradually over the last few weeks, that he'd been clear with his family about why. He said he couldn't build a life with someone who stood by and did nothing when her sister was being erased, Rachel said quietly. His words, not mine. I sat down on the edge of the rocking chair and stared at the light filtering through the curtains. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything close to celebration. Just a quiet sense of something long overdue, finally settling into place. Over the next few days, Rachel filled in the rest. Mason had moved out of their shared apartment and taken most of his things with him. The wedding venue had been released. Vanessa hadn't posted anything online, but her profile photo disappeared, and the engagement pictures vanished too. A week later at a family cookout, one I didn't attend, but Rachel did, Elaine tried to explain the breakup. She told a cousin that Mason had always been overly sensitive and that it had nothing to do with the past. But no one really bought it. Even the ones who'd stayed quiet all this time had started to see the pattern. David, for his part, stopped attending gatherings altogether. Rachel said she hadn't seen him in nearly a month. Back at home, Adam and I focused on the days ahead. We'd signed up for a birthing class at the community center and started taking short evening walks around the neighborhood after dinner. My body was changing fast. So was everything else. One night, Adam handed me a letter that had come through the office. It was addressed to me, but the return address was listed as a general P.O. box. I opened it carefully. It was from Elaine. This time her words were more personal. She said she'd made mistakes, that she hadn't understood how deep the wounds went. She mentioned the baby said she'd heard through someone that I was expecting, and that she hoped one day I'd be willing to share that part of my life with them. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't demand anything. She just wrote that she missed me. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the first one. Then I turned off the light and went upstairs. At my next session, I brought it up to Dr. Myers. I told her about Vanessa, about Mason, about the second letter. She listened closely, then asked, "What did you feel when you read it?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Grateful," I said, but not moved. She nodded. That's what peace feels like. You can recognize someone's pain without taking it on. The following Saturday, Greg and Marcia threw a small baby shower in their backyard. The weather was warm, the breeze soft, and everything smelled faintly like rosemary and grilled peaches. Nina brought a hand-painted growth chart. Rachel arrived with a tiny basket of folded onesies and a note tucked in between that simply said, "You are rewriting everything." Later that night, Adam and I sat in the living room surrounded by tissue paper and ribbons. He looked over at me quiet for a moment, then said, "I think you've done the hardest part already." I looked down at my hands resting on my stomach. "What part is that?" I asked. "Letting go," he said, "and not going back." I didn't reply, but I knew he was right. The next morning, I received a message request on social media. It was from Vanessa. I didn't open it right away. Just saw her name, the tiny profile photo, the single line, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a while, then locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but for the first time in a long time, I knew that I didn't owe anyone an answer. I didn't open Vanessa's message for 3 days. It just sat there waiting, harmless, silent. On the third night, I read it through once, then again. It wasn't long. She said she understood if I never wanted to respond, that she hadn't seen it clearly at the time, but now she couldn't unsee it. She didn't ask to meet. She didn't mention the wedding or the baby. Just said she was sorry for being complicit, for being quiet, for letting them rewrite my place in the family. I didn't write her back, not because I hadn't forgiven her, but because there wasn't anything else I needed from her anymore. A few weeks later, our daughter was born. We named her June Elise Foster. She arrived just after midnight in a quiet delivery room with soft lights and the faint hum of the monitor in the corner. Adam cried first, this sudden quiet sound I'd never heard from him before. I held her against my chest and felt something shift in me, like the final thread of an old life had let go. Marcia and Greg were the first to meet her. Nina came the next day with a camera around her neck and tears in her eyes. Rachel showed up with lemon bars and a handwritten card that just said, "You did it, and you did it with grace." We brought June home wrapped in the quilt Marcia made, the one with the tiny stitched birds. Her nursery smelled faintly of cedarwood and laundry soap. At night, Adam and I would take turns rocking her while the house fell into that peaceful silence I used to think I'd never have. Dr. Myers sent a note during my leave, just a short message letting me know she was proud of me. I read it aloud one afternoon while June slept against my chest. Adam kissed the top of her head and said, "She's already home. She doesn't have to earn it." And that was the difference. That's what I'd fought for. Not just the right to walk away, but the right to build something better. Something honest. Something safe. I never saw another letter from my parents. They didn't try to reach out again. And even if they had, I think by then I would have known that closure doesn't always look like an apology. Sometimes it looks like a boundary that holds. Sometimes it looks like joy that no longer needs their name to exist. We sent out birth announcements, simple cards with June's name in soft gray lettering. One went to Rachel, one to Nina, one to Dr. Myers, one to Greg and Marcia, who hung it on their fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. None went to my parents, and that was okay. I don't carry bitterness anymore, just memory, and the quiet knowledge that I chose a different path when I could have stayed small. I don't need them to understand it. I lived it. June will grow up knowing her voice matters, that love isn't earned through silence or sacrifice, that family shows up and stays. And me, I'm still designing, still learning, still choosing people who choose me back. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who made you feel invisible, I hope you know you're not alone. You can rebuild. You can rewrite the story. And sometimes the ending is quieter than expected, but stronger than you ever imagined. Thanks for being here with me. And if this story reminded you of your own, I'd love to hear it. Wherever you're listening from, you're part of something too. Take care. And until next time, be kind to yourself. You deserve that much.